Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Steve's View. Today, I want to talk about a subject that's been making headlines around the world again: the push to recognize Palestine as a state and why that move has become so controversial. You've probably seen that countries like the UK and France recently announced recognition of Palestine. For some people, this looks like a breakthrough, a long overdue step toward justice for Palestinians. For others, it looks like a reckless political gesture that will only make the conflict worse. So, what's really going on here? Why do some people say Palestine isn't ready to be a state? Why do others argue recognition is the only way forward? And what does this all mean for peace in the Middle East? Let's break it down. The first question we have to ask is very basic. What actually defines a country? International law has an answer. Back in 1933, the Montevideo Convention laid out 4 conditions for statehood. 1. A permanent population. 2. A defined territory with clear borders. 3. A government that effectively controls that territory and population. 4. The ability to conduct foreign relations with other states. That's the checklist. It sounds simple, but it matters, because recognition is supposed to go to entities that really function as states. So how does Palestine stack up against this list? Permanent population. Absolutely. Millions of Palestinians live in Gaza and the West Bank. Defined territory? That's where things get messy. Borders are disputed. Is it the 1967 lines? Does it include East Jerusalem? Israel doesn't agree. And even Palestinians don't have unified control over these areas. Government? Again, messy. The West Bank is run by the Palestinian Authority, which many see as corrupt and weak. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, which most of the Western world considers a terrorist organization. That's not a single effective government. Foreign relations. Palestinians do have diplomatic missions abroad, but recognition is patchy and inconsistent. By this measure, Palestine doesn't fully qualify as a state. And this is one of the big arguments people like Professor Zhang Ping, a Chinese scholar, have made. Palestine simply doesn't meet the international standard. Now, that's the legal perspective. But, as we all know, politics doesn't always follow law to the letter. Recognition has always been political. Kosovo, South Sudan, even Taiwan have been recognized or treated like states under circumstances that don't fit neatly into the Montevideo framework. So this is where the debate starts. Do we stick with legal definitions, or do we treat recognition as a political tool that can be used to send signals, even if the criteria aren't fully met? Here's the next big issue: timing. The most recent calls to recognize Palestine came not long after the October 7th attacks, when Hamas carried out a brutal assault on Israel. Civilians were killed, families were targeted, and hostages were dragged into Gaza. It shocked the world. Now imagine what it looks like when, in the aftermath of that violence, Western countries turn around and say, "We're going to recognize Palestine." To critics, this sends a terrible message. Terrorism works. Kill enough civilians, and you move closer to your political goals. Recognition, in that sense, becomes a reward for violence. And honestly, this is a fair concern. Nobody wants to encourage militant groups to believe that bloodshed is the path to legitimacy. But here's where the counterargument comes in. Palestine is not the same thing as Hamas. Millions of Palestinians are not Hamas fighters. Many live under the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas. Many are just trying to survive, not fight. Recognition, some argue, isn't about rewarding Hamas. It's about giving ordinary Palestinians some dignity, and maybe empowering moderate leaders instead of leaving the field to extremists. So which way does it cut? Does recognition empower moderates, or does it embolden militants? That depends a lot on timing, context, and what kind of recognition we're talking about. For decades, the phrase two-state solution has been the centerpiece of international diplomacy. one state for Israel, one state for Palestine, living side by side in peace. Sounds good on paper. The UN endorsed it back in 1947. Every American president since the 1990s has mentioned it as the only realistic way forward. The European Union treats it as the official goal. But here's the problem. On the ground, support for a two-state solution has collapsed. In Israel, many people have lost faith after repeated failures. When Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, the hope was that disengagement would reduce violence. Instead, Hamas took over, and rockets followed. To many Israelis, that's proof that giving land to Palestinians just means creating another launchpad for attacks. Polls today show a majority of Israelis don't believe in two states anymore. In Palestine, frustration is just as deep. Decades of checkpoints, settlement expansion, and military raids have left people hopeless. At the same time, decades of propaganda have taught some Palestinians to see the elimination of Israel as the ultimate goal. For them, two states isn't even on the table. So while diplomats keep repeating two states like it's gospel, ordinary people on both sides are turning away from the idea. That doesn't mean peace is impossible, but it does mean the old formulas may no longer work. Another angle worth talking about is foreign aid. For decades, billions of dollars have flowed into the Palestinian territories from Europe, the US, and Arab states. The stated purpose is humanitarian: schools, hospitals, infrastructure. But again and again, evidence has shown that a lot of that money gets misused. Some of it goes into the pockets of corrupt officials. Some ends up funding weapons, tunnels, and terror. Former Israeli leaders have even shown documents proving this diversion. That's why some, like the Trump administration, decided to cut aid. The argument was, why keep sending money if it only fuels corruption and violence? Better to stop until there's real accountability. The dilemma, though, is this: if you cut aid completely, ordinary people suffer. Poverty deepens, desperation grows, and extremist groups like Hamas become more attractive because they step in to provide services. If you keep aid flowing, you risk indirectly funding violence. Either way, it's messy. So why are countries like France and the UK recognizing Palestine now? Some of it is domestic politics. These governments want to signal support for justice, human rights, and peace. Values their voters care about. Some of it is about international positioning, showing independence from US policy. And some of it is symbolic, aimed at reminding Israel that occupation cannot last forever. But here's the criticism: symbolism doesn't equal strategy. If recognition doesn't lead to real negotiations, if it doesn't improve daily life for Palestinians, if it doesn't reduce violence, then it's just theater. And in the Middle East, theater often costs lives. Here's my personal take, after looking at both sides. I understand the emotional power of recognizing Palestine. It feels like a statement of fairness, a way to say Palestinians matter. And I do think that ignoring Palestinian aspirations entirely just feeds despair and extremism. But I also see the danger. Recognizing Palestine right now, under current conditions, doesn't solve anything. It doesn't create borders. It doesn't unify Palestinian leadership. It doesn't guarantee peace. What it does risk is sending the message that violence pays and that international law is optional. I'm not against a Palestinian state in principle. In fact, I think in the long run, some form of two-state arrangement is probably the only way out of this endless conflict. But I don't think recognition should come before Palestinians have a government that speaks for all of them, before Hamas is disarmed or sidelined, and before there's a real path to negotiations. Until then, recognition is more likely to inflame the conflict than to resolve it. So, to sum it up, legally, Palestine doesn't meet the requirements of statehood. Politically, recognition is more about symbolism than substance. Morally, it risks rewarding violence if done at the wrong time. Strategically, it doesn't fix the deeper problems: divided leadership, mistrust, and ongoing violence. That's why I think Europe's move is a mistake. Not because Palestinians don't deserve a future, but because recognition in the current moment won't deliver that future. Peace, if it ever comes, will require responsibility, accountability, and leadership on both sides. And it will require the international community to stop looking for easy symbolic victories and start pushing for real solutions. Thanks for sticking with me through this long discussion. If you found this breakdown helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, do you think recognizing Palestine helps or hurts the chances of peace?